Chapter 1, The Auction Block. The evening sun bled red over Redwater, stretching long shadows across the dusty main street. The town buzzed with saloon chatter, the clink of glasses spilling out onto the wooden walkways, and the sound of boots dragging across grit. It should have been another night like any other, until the cowhands, drunk on whiskey and mean humor, dragged Clara Mae to the center of it all. "Step right up, boys," one of them hollered, his voice thick with laughter. "What's a rancher's daughter worth? Eh? $1? $2? She'll cook, she'll clean. Hell, she might even smile if you pay her enough." The crowd roared. Spurs jingled as men gathered, faces flushed from drink and cruel delight. Clara's cheeks burned hotter than the sunset. Her hands trembled, but she held her chin high, the stubbornness in her blue eyes daring anyone to laugh at her weakness. "This ain't funny," she spat, her voice sharp as a whip crack. The wind caught her words and flung them down the street, but it only made the men laugh harder. And then he stepped forward. Elias Boone. The air seemed to still when he pushed through the crowd, a broad-shouldered figure, shadowed beneath the black hat, the silver star of his belt buckle catching the dying light. He wasn't law. Not anymore. Folks whispered enough about the outlaw years that clung to his name. But he had the kind of presence that hushed the crowd without saying a word. "How much do I hear for the lady?" the cowhand jeered, puffed up by the attention. $10. "I'll give 20, Elias said, his voice low, steady, like a bullet chambered. The laughter faltered. Clara's eyes snapped to him, anger flashing through her humiliation. She didn't need his pity. But the men's faces shifted, from mocking to uneasy. Elias Boone was no man to cross. $20, another drunk sneered, tried to keep the fire alive. "For what? You planning to—" Elias's gaze cut him off, sharp as a drawn knife. He stepped closer, tossed a glinting coin purse onto the wagon wheel beside Clara. The clink of silver rang louder than all the laughter. "She's mine," he said simply. The words rolled heavy in the silence that followed. Coyotes yipped in the far-off hills, as if mocking the town's sudden quiet. Clara's heart hammered. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him she wasn't his to buy. But the smirk slid from the cowhands' faces, and the crowd began to murmur uneasy now. Elias tipped his hat to her, his dark eyes unreadable. "Come on," he said softly. "Time to get you out of here." The town had set the joke in motion. Elias Boone had ended it. And in the dust and hush of that twilight street, Redwater knew something had just changed, though none could yet see how deep. Chapter 2, Bound by a Name. The morning after the auction prank. Clara Mae stood on the edge of Redwater, the prairie stretching wide and endless before her. The town's laughter still clung to her like burrs on her dress. Every time she passed the general store or the blacksmith's, she felt eyes on her back, whispers darting like rattlesnakes in the grass. Elias Boone waited by his horse near the hitching post, arms crossed, hat pulled low against the rising sun. His stallion stamped the dirt impatiently, a beast as restless as its master. "You don't have to stand there staring," Clara snapped, tugging her shawl tighter. "I'll not thank you for what you did." Elias's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch, didn't ask for thanks. His voice was as steady as the plains wind. "Just couldn't watch him treat you like cattle." Her cheeks flushed hot, though whether from shame or stubbornness, she couldn't tell. "And what now? The whole town thinks I'm yours. You might as well have branded me." He shifted his weight, spurs clinking softly. "Then let's give him something else to talk about. I'll pay you honest wages to work my ranch. Folks can think what they want. Least this way you're safe from their tongues." Clara laughed bitterly. "Work for you? I'd rather." But the words caught in her throat. Her family ranch was failing, her father too ill to ride, and her brothers long gone chasing their own fortunes. Pride was all she had left, and even that had been stripped from her last night. Elias must have seen the hesitation flicker in her eyes, because he softened just slightly. "I ain't your enemy, Clara. You know that." She studied him. The broad frame, the weathered skin, the scar that carved down near his jaw. The story said he'd killed men, robbed coaches, lived a life of dust and gunpowder before settling on a spread outside town. He was danger wrapped in quiet, a man whose past clung to him like smoke. "Your trouble," she murmured. "Maybe," he admitted, "but trouble that pays fair coin." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the jangle of spurs from a passing cowboy and the creak of the saloon doors swinging open. Two women on the boardwalk watched them, whispering behind gloved hands. Clara lifted her chin, refusing to shrink. "Fine," she said at last. "I'll work your ranch, but not because I need your protection. I'll earn every cent, and I'll not owe you a thing." Elias's mouth curved into the faintest ghost of a smile. "That's all I'm a skin." As she followed him toward his waiting horse, the prairie wind whipped through the street, carrying away the sound of whispers. Yet Clara knew the eyes of Redwater were still on her. To them, she was bound to Elias Boone now, by a name, by a joke turned into scandal. But to Clara, it was something else entirely. The star of a bargain she swore she'd never let twist into anything more. Chapter 3. Whispers in the Saloon. The Redwater Saloon came alive after sundown, its wooden floors trembling beneath boots and spurs, the air thick with cigar smoke and the twang of a fiddle. Glasses clinked, cards slapped against green felt, and the smell of spilled whiskey mingled with the scent of cheap perfume. Yet, beneath the noise, a single story rippled like wildfire. Clara Mae, bought for $20 by Elias Boone. She felt at the moment she stepped through the swinging doors. The laughter dipped, then rose again sharper, like knives being whetted. Her spine stiffened, but she kept her chin high, walking past the gawkers with a tray balanced steady in her hands. Work was work. Elias's ranch couldn't pay her until next week, and she needed coin now. "Careful, darlin'," one ranch hand called, his words slurred by whiskey. "Don't spill the drinks. Wouldn't want to cheat your new owner out of his money." The table burst into raucous laughter. Clara's knuckles whitened around the tray, but she said nothing. Her boots clicked against the floorboards as she turned away. At the back, Elias leaned against the bar, his hat shadowing his eyes. He'd been watching her, silent as always, but the muscles in his jaw ticked. "Leave it," she muttered as she passed him, refusing to meet his gaze. "They'll tire themselves out." But the room didn't tire, it sharpened. A younger ranch hand, all swagger and cheap cologne, pushed up from his chair and blocked Clara's path. His smile was thin and mean. "Tell me, Boone," he said loud enough for the saloon to hush, "what exactly did you buy for $20? Was it her hands for work, or her lips for kissing?" The silence snapped like a taut rope. Clara's face went hot, fury burning her throat. But before she could speak, Elias moved. He didn't shout. He didn't posture. He simply stepped between Clara and the man, his presence dark and unyielding. "Say that again," Elias said, his voice low, dangerous as the click of a hammer drawn back. The ranch hand smirked, pretending bravado. "Didn't mean nothing, Boone. Just having a bit of fun." Elias struck like lightning. His fist connected with the man's jaw, sending him sprawling across the poker table. Cards scattered, whiskey spilled, and chairs screeched back as men scrambled to their feet. The ranch hand roared, drawing a pistol in a drunken rage. Gasps echoed. Clara froze, her heart pounding like hooves across the plains. Elias's own revolver was in his hand before the drunk could steady his aim. "Don't," he warned, his tone steady as stone. The man hesitated, then cursed and dropped the weapon. The saloon exhaled in one ragged breath. Clara's pulse hammered, and for the first time, she looked at Elias not with anger, but with something far more dangerous, the slow dawning of trust. Chapter 4, Fire and Rain. The storm came sudden, rolling in from the plains like an army on the march. Clouds, black as coal, swallowed the horizon, and thunder cracked over Redwater with a force that rattled window panes. Clara Mae stood on her family's porch, clutching her shawl as the wind tore at her skirts. The old ranch house groaned against the gusts, its timbers weary from years of neglect. Then she smelled it. Smoke. Her heart lurched. Beyond the corral, lightning had struck the dry grass, and the flames were racing fast toward the barn. Inside were the last of their cattle, the only thing keeping her father's ranch afloat. No, 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 she cried, rushing into the rain that had begun to lash the ground. She grabbed the bucket from the porch, but it was hopeless. The fire spread like a living beast, orange tongues clawing higher with every gust. A horse's hooves thundered through the mud. Clara spun and saw him. Elias Boone, his stallion rearing against the storm, mane whipping in the wind. He vaulted from the saddle in one fluid motion, landing beside her as though summoned by fate itself. "Get back inside," he barked, eyes glinting in the firelight. "I won't," Clara shouted, her voice raw. "The herd, if we lose them, we got nothing left." Elias didn't waste time arguing. He grabbed a rope from his saddle and sprinted toward the barn, his coat snapping in the wind. Clara chased after him, skirts heavy with rain, boots sinking in the muck. Together, they forced the barn doors open, smoke and heat blasting their faces. The cattle bawled in panic. Elias wrapped the rope around a post, then slapped the nearest steer hard on the flank. "Go on. Move," he roared, driving them into the storm. Clara coughed, her lungs clawing against the smoke, but she waved and shouted, guiding the animals out into the rain. By the time the last calf stumbled free, the barn was an inferno. Flames devoured the roof, and with a deafening crack, a beam collapsed behind them. Elias grabbed Clara's wrist and yanked her clear just as the structure caved in on itself, sparks scattering into the night. They staggered into the open field, the downpour hissing against the blaze. Clara collapsed to her knees, hair plastered to her face, breath coming in ragged gasps. Elias crouched beside her, his chest heaving, his hand steady on her shoulder. "You could have died in there," he rasped, rain dripping from his hat brim. "So could you," she shot back, meeting his eyes. For a heartbeat, the storm seemed to fade. In the glow of the fire and the wash of rain, Clara saw more than an outlaw's shadow in Elias Boone. She saw a man who would risk everything, not for pride, not for redemption, but for her. Her hand trembled, and without thinking, she let it rest against his. Elias didn't pull away. The storm raged on, but between them, something fragile and fierce began to take root, born in fire and baptized in rain. Chapter 5, The Duel at Sundown. The sun sank low over Redwater, painting the sky in streaks of crimson and gold. Shadows stretched long across the dusty main street, where the town had gathered in a hush that felt like church. Boots scuffed, spurs jingled, whispers rippled, but no laughter this time. Everyone knew what was about to happen. Clara Mae stood near the boardwalk, her fingers digging into the railing until it would bit back. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Out in the street, Elias Boone waited, tall and still, his black hat tilted against the blaze of the setting sun. Across from him, slick in a fine coat and polished boots, stood Matthew Carver, son of the richest cattle baron in the territory and Clara's former suitor. His smug grin carried the same cruelty that once wrapped itself in charm. Tonight, it dripped venom. "You think you can steal what's mine, Boone?" Carver sneered, his hand hovering above his pistol. "That woman belongs with me." not some washed-up outlaw who bought her like a mule at auction. The crowd murmured. Clara's cheeks flamed, but before she could speak, Elias did. "She's not yours," he said, voice steady as stone. "Never was. And I didn't buy her. I protected her from the likes of you." Carver's grin faltered, replaced by a snarl. "Words don't matter. Guns do." The street went silent. The only sounds were the creak of wooden signs in the wind and the distant cry of a coyote. Clara's breath caught. She wanted to scream, to stop this madness, but she knew Redwater's law. An insult like Carver's could only be answered in blood. Elias shifted his stance, fingers loose at his side. His eyes flicked once toward Clara, and for the first time she saw fear there, not for himself, but for her. The clock struck 7 from the saloon wall, each chime ringing like a hammer on a coffin nail. Carver's hand twitched first. The guns roared. Smoke filled the air, acrid and sharp. Carver staggered back, clutching his shoulder, his pistol clattering to the dirt. A howl of rage escaped him, but he crumpled to his knees, beaten. Elias stood firm, though Clara saw the blood seeping from a line across his ribs where the bullet had grazed him. He swayed, but his eyes never left hers. Without thinking, Clara ran into the street. Gasps rose from the crowd as she threw her arms around him, steadying his weight. Her voice shook, but it carried. "He's not my shame. He's my choice." The town fell silent, stunned. Even Carver, clutching his wound, could not find words. Elias leaned into her, his breath hot against her ear. "You didn't have to." "I did," she whispered fiercely, "and I'll do it again." The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the street bathed in twilight. The duel was over, but something greater had been decided. Clara Mae's heart and Elias Boone's redemption bound together before the eyes of Redwater. Chapter 6. More Than a Joke. The morning after the duel, Redwater woke restless. Word traveled faster than a prairie fire. Elias Boone had faced Matthew Carver at sundown and lived. Some called it luck, others called it justice, but everyone agreed it wasn't the bullets that changed the town. It was Clara Mae. She walked to the main street with her head high, skirts brushing the dust, eyes steady on the folk who dared to stare. No whispers this time, only silence, heavy and uncertain. By her side, Elias moved slower than usual, his arm bound from the graze, his frame weary from blood loss. Yet his presence was no less commanding. At the saloon steps, the crowd gathered again, like vultures circling a story. Carver had been carried off by his men the night before, swearing vengeance. But even his family's money couldn't wash away the sight of Clara throwing herself into Boone's arms. Redwater's tongues were itching for more. Clara stopped in the street, turning to face them all. Her heart thundered, but she refused to let it show. "You made me into a joke," she said, her voice carrying clear over the dust-laden air. "Sold on your laughter. Shame for your sport. But I'll not be your entertainment anymore." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Men shifted uneasily. Women clutched their shawls tighter. Clara reached for Elias's hand. He hesitated, then let his callous fingers close around hers, firm and steady. She lifted their joined hands high enough for all to see. "This man didn't buy me," she continued, her gaze sweeping the faces before her. "He stood for me. When the town mocked, he silenced you. When fire threatened my family's land, he risked his life to save it. When another man tried to claim me, Elias Boone bled for my name." Her voice broke, but only for a heartbeat. "I choose him. With every breath, I choose him." The silence deepened. Somewhere, a horse snorted. A church bell tolled the hour. Redwater had no words left. Their cruel joke had become a love story written in blood, rain, and fire. Elias squeezed her hand, his dark eyes softening. "Clara," he murmured low enough for only her to hear. You don't know what you're talking on. My past. I don't care, she cut him off, her lips trembling into a smile. The man I see now is enough. For the first time in years, Elias Boone let the weight fall from his shoulders. He tipped his hat back, the faintest smile tugging his scarred face, and drew her into his arms, right there in the street where it had all begun. The town that once mocked him watched in stunned silence as the outlaw and the rancher's daughter claimed something fiercer than pride and stronger than scandal. Not a joke, not a bargain, a beginning. The sun sank low over the Redwater plains, burning the horizon in hues of copper and blood red. Wind whispered through the sagebrush, carrying the faint strains of fiddle drifting from the saloon miles behind them. Clara Mae stood on the ridge beside Elias Boone, the town small and far away now, as if its gossip and cruel laughter belonged to another lifetime. Below them, the prairie stretched endless and untamed, the promise of a future yet to be written. Elias's stallion pawed the ground, eager for the trail, while Clara's hand rested steady in his. "You sure about this?" Elias asked quietly, his voice roughened by wind and years of regret. "Riding with me means leaving behind the only life you've known." Clara turned to him, her eyes bright in the dying light. "I'm not leaving," she said softly. "I'm choosing, and I choose you." For a moment neither moved. Then Elias leaned down, pressing his forehead to hers, the scar on his jaw catching the last gold of the sun. In that fragile silence, the weight of their past lifted like dust in the wind. Hand in hand, they mounted their horses. Together, they rode west into blaze of sunset. Outlaws no longer, but partners in a love fierce enough to silence a whole town. The prairie swallowed their silhouettes, but their story lingered, like the echo of hoofbeats fading into forever.